Hello students! I wanted to share a few things as you're creating the final drafts of your presentations. So no matter what kind of software you're using, whether it's PowerPoint, whether it's Canva, whatever it is, there are some basic rules that make it a lot easier for people to read. So I definitely recommend you make some adjustments now before that final draft. So this is a good time in your workflow, I hope, to be able to do that. I've seen some drafts of your slide. Some of you could definitely use a little bit of work to make them just a lot easier to read. In some cases, all that takes is splitting one slide into two slides. So let's talk about accessible PowerPoints. One of the biggest things to do is that for humans, it seems like it's a little easier for us to read on a screen in sans serif fonts. So that's fonts like these without dramatic tails. Looks like the T's here do have actually a little tail, but it's not like Times New Roman, which has a lot of tails on a lot of different letters. So you could use these types of texts. So I don't actually recommend using red, but these are a couple different examples. Liberation Sans, Veranda, Arial. These are all text formats that have no serifs, no little tails. So that just makes it a little bit easier to read, not quite as messy, especially when we're reading it on a screen. Cognitive psychologists have seen that we actually retain a little bit more of the information when we see a sans serif font on a screen in front of us. Versus in like a printed page, we do better with something with serifs, like Times New Roman or something with the little tails on a printed document or a book. So you should be able to find one of these, if not all of these, in your software that you're using. Also, for any kind of text on your slides, especially if you're using like a presentation format, it shouldn't be any smaller than 32 point text size. So that's for the main headings on documents, so like the main subject of what this slide is. Don't be smaller than 32, just because it makes it a lot easier to read when it's larger. The subheadings, or maybe like a first bullet point, no smaller than size 30, and then any general text should be no smaller than size 28. So if some of you go to your slides right now and you put 28 for everything, you'll see that it just goes over the page. If that's the case, great. Split that into multiple pages and even take one of the next suggestions and maybe cut some of those words as well. So for this slide, for example, this is kind of a bit of text to give you examples, but most slides should have less text overall. Also, we do see that bolding and underlining is a lot cleaner, easier way to draw attention to something as opposed to quotation marks or italics as well. So use bolding, use underlining to draw specific attention to specific words. All right, so here is another example, and this has a green background with black text. One thing you should notice is this is pretty difficult to read, so don't have a dark text on a dark background. Something like this, where it's a pastel background, you can simply use white. If you use images on the background, make sure that they are not distracting. So there was a professor that I had who had gone on a recent vacation. I think it was like to San Francisco or something like that, and he'd taken a picture of the Golden Gate Bridge that he was very, very proud of. He also edited the picture so that it was blue. So rather than being like the red of the Golden Gate Bridge, it was a very blue, like monochrome picture, but there were these lines all the way through the slide. And so you couldn't read anything on the slide because there's these dark blue lines all over the place. So background should be super simple. As you can see here, I have kind of a bluey green to a yellow. It just kind of gradients. So simple is better. Two color gradients are acceptable, pastel colors are generally better, and a light background and a dark text is a little bit easier to read. You can also do a dark background and a white text, but do your best to avoid any kind of gray. No gray on the background, no gray in the text. It is just harder to read, and some screens that people will look at or read it off of are not going to do as well as maybe your screen does of distinguishing between a gray and a black, or a gray and another gray. So also another thing to consider is the color wheel. If you've been in an art class, you've probably seen the color wheel. Try to have colors that are kind of opposite from each other on the color wheel. You can do that, or adjacent to each other on the color wheel. So something like these colors or these colors. So here's a good example. That white text, still pretty difficult to read on this gray background. You might be able to see this gray text, but again, it's kind of difficult to read. So use high contrast. This is white on black, this is a yellow and a black text, this is a darker background and a white text. As you can see, this one is the easiest to read. So very high contrast, easy for someone who maybe isn't able to see as well to be able to read. And that's one of the things about all of these rules with PowerPoints, is that this helps make it more accessible for someone who maybe has worse vision, who might be colorblind, anything like that, any kind of vision impairments, cataracts, whatever it might be. These kinds of rules help everyone in general, but especially people who need those kind of accommodations for their vision. So here's a couple other examples just to give you some ideas of what, say, black text on a yellow background look like versus black text on a white background, that kind of thing. So here you see some examples that you shouldn't do. Depending on your screen, you might not be able to tell that there are some words within this blue block right here. It says dark blue and violet. So dark blue background and violet text, pretty difficult to read. Black background and blue text, very difficult to read. Don't do that. So here are a couple examples. This text is supposed to be white, so I'm going to skip that one. But you can see, even with this fairly simple background, it isn't super contrasty. It's still harder to read than on these pastels, right? So the black is easier on this pastel versus the dark blue, but a dark blue would be acceptable. So just a bunch of different examples to see some pastel-y colors with these texts. All right. Additionally, slides should be simple, no more than 3 blocks of information. So here's a block of information, here's another block of information, here's a block of information. No more than 3 blocks of information. One of your blocks might be a picture. And with that, no more than 6 individual lines of information per block. So again, that goes to the text size as well. You don't need to pack every single fact that you want to talk about on one slide. In your presentation, since you're filming it kind of like I'm filming this right here, you can talk about more than you have on your slide. You can present it with your words as if you wrote out a script of everything I'm saying. It's more than just what's on the slide. That's what you should use it for. It's a visual example. This slide right here is a visual example of what I'm talking about. So bulleted lists are an exception. No more than 6 bulleted lines in a bulleted list. So just use that as like a rule of thumb. No more than 6 lines of text, and the text should be shorter rather than longer as well. So here is a good example of the right size, the right number of points. This is about the maximum number of words you want on your slides. And as you'll see, some of my slides in my actual class that I teach from don't always follow these rules. So I'm trying to do better. I try to adjust them every semester to have more and more like this and less text on any given slide. But it's a work in progress for sure. So make choices that'll provide contrast to the reader, provide comfort and make it easier for the reader to read. So right, a pastel or white background and a black text. It's high contrast, easy to read, easy to interpret. You can see this is the main point. These are the subpoints. Has to be large enough to be able to be read, and it is very friendly to people with any kind of visual impairment or color blindness. So in the group presentation slides, I've shown you those examples, but you don't actually need to use those as well. A lot of you already have a set format already. So those are a couple rules. Now that you are getting a little closer to recording your presentation, I also have a video about recording presentations that you can watch. Take some time to make some adjustments to your slides or to your visual presentation to make it easier to read. So in a lot of your cases, that's going to mean just breaking your 1 or 2 or 3 slides up into 3 or 4 or 5 or 6 slides, so that you have bigger text, maybe shorten the text, summarize things a little bit more, maybe you include more relevant images for what you're talking about. You don't have to have it all in text on the slide. One of the main reasons I have a lot more text on some slides is because I know students use the slides as a study tool, like skimming through the slides as they're prepping for an exam. So I try to find a balance between good presentation format and being an easy to go through slide in reviewing for an exam. All right, if you have any questions, email me, and good luck making a really good presentation. So again, you can use PowerPoint, I use LibreOffice, you can use Canva, anything like that.